Today, I'm going ahead of the science and the news to give you some cutting edge insights. As you know, what I'm explaining to you are ideas that, if correct, are quite relevant in the future. And this is what I've always done. I am always trying to be ahead of the news, ahead of the science, giving you cutting edge information from an analytic point of view, and I'll explain why in a scientific way. What I'm talking about today is the chickpea virus, chikungunya. And the reason why I'm focused on it is because of this headline. China reports over 7,000 chikungunya cases in the Guangdong province, trying to contain it. This is August 7th, 2025. So that's within the last 24 hours that this was reported. And so this gave me a reason to focus on it and to think about why could this be relevant. Before I explain why I'm talking about this, I want to remind you that coming up just very shortly is our conference, NeuroCovid, the Neurological Aftermath of COVID-19. The link is in the description if you want to be reminded, if you want to have access to putting in your questions where I'll know where it's coming from. Please click on that link and join us. It will still be shared, so you can join us for what should be an interesting, at least 2.5 hour discussion where we'll cover multiple topics about what's going on in terms of the neurological symptoms. But let's get back to this question. Why am I talking about this new virus exposed? In reality, it isn't a new virus because it was found in about 1950. But there is something different about this that concerns me. I made a presentation just yesterday, and it was the fact that RFK Jr. pulled back on 22 studies or funding for mRNA vaccines. Okay. And I said, I don't think they're going to go down without a fight. So I expect that there's going to be significant knockback against RFK. And one of the things that, if my instinct is right, and this is just my thought, based on the fact that there is still no clear evidence of the origin of COVID-19, we don't know where it came from, it has unusual characteristics, it does things we've never seen done before. It was used to bring forward a whole vaccination campaign. I wouldn't be surprised, because it hasn't been thoroughly investigated, that it's not done again. This was part of the reason why I said this was a mistake, to not figure out exactly what happened. And so, if you have a situation where you're trying to bring in a technology that requires people to be concerned, you need a new focus. And so my instinct was that with this big change from BARDA that RFK had done, expect something to happen that will force the next stage of the rollout. It's not going to stop. It's not going to be that easy. So let's look at what exactly is happening in China, and then I'll take you through the science as to what this virus is and why I think, even though it's not the same as COVID, it could still be relevant. So, as I said, the first thing here is the fact that you have a region in China that has shown 7,000 up to 10,000 cases since the end of June of chikungunya. This is clearly unusual because whilst they do have the virus there, this was a big outbreak in this region. Now, it was after a big rainy season, so they are anticipating that this is related to the fact that they have more standing water. At least 12 cities within that region have reported cases, with nearly 3,000 new infections recorded in the past week alone. So this is something, and this is the first case in Hong Kong, 12-year-old who has just returned from Foshan. Now, there is something about this that struck me as strange. And you will understand why, when I go through the cycle as to what happens with this virus, as to why I don't understand why it's spreading so fast in this region. So let's get to the basics of the science. What really is this virus and how does it work? So, as I said, the chikungunya virus, CHIKV, it's a vector-borne virus. That means it's transmitted by mosquitoes, Aedes aegypti, same ones that can also transmit malaria. It enters the skin through the bite of the mosquito, and it infects certain cells in the skin. It then spreads from the skin to the lymph nodes, and then it spreads to the bloodstream where it infects multiple other cells. And this is when people have a lot of symptoms. It has a specific attachment or affiliation to joints, synovial fibroblasts. And this is why joint pain is such an important part of the condition. And it can persist for long periods of time, leading to chronic illness. Okay? But this virus is not usually terminal. It doesn't usually kill people, not in the same way that had happened with COVID. So it's not the same thing. And so part of what I was thinking about is, well, uh, even though it's causing people some pains and chronic illness, it's unlikely to take grip like what happened with COVID. But let's learn through the life cycle, because this could be relevant to different parts of the world. And you'll understand why I'm talking about it, because you may be thinking, I'm in a temperate country. Why in the world would this be relevant to me? Well, let's look at what the cycle is. The first thing is that the mosquito has to bite someone. And you can see here the image of the mosquito. It's going to penetrate the skin and it's trying to get some blood. And in the process, some of the viral, the virus in the mosquito will get into the body. And this is a similar pattern to what happens with malaria. Now, this is the bit that I think is important. And this is what I am thinking about or anticipating. And this is what I looked at today to try and understand. Hypothetical. Okay. In the same way that SARS-CoV in 2003 is nowhere near as dangerous as SARS-CoV-2 in 2019, it's because of a number of patterns around the virus that really make it far more infective and dangerous. Now, as far as we're told, this is all natural. It came from some animal in a seafood market or fish market, and this is how it spread. But it can do some stuff that we've not seen viruses do before. That's a different story. So my question was, imagine this virus bounces around with lots of bats and other animals and ends up in fish markets and so on, the usual story. How could it become far more problematic? And so there are a number of things that came up from my research. One, the viral glycoprotein that it uses to enter cells, if it was expanded, it could infect more human cells beyond just the MXRA8. That's really the key lock that it uses to infect cells. But imagine if it had more that it could use. Additionally, a furin cleavage site, and this is important. Without this on the COVID virus, we would not have had a pandemic. But suppose, just suppose, something like that was also on this virus, where it can really infect a whole lot of cells, way beyond anything that we could imagine. Additionally, if you adjusted the way how it interacted with the mosquito, it could widen how far the mosquitoes could infect. And then if you altered some of the non-structural proteins that especially suppress interferon, it could do so more effectively. Now, this one is the biggie. Now, the reason why I said there is something unusual about it is the fact that usually when people get infected, Within a few days, they start having symptoms. And the fact that they have symptoms means they isolate. Once they isolate, it's then you know it's a mosquito based infection, and so therefore you will use mosquito nets, and you will use mosquito burning candles, and so on, and so you reduce the risk of spread. But with that knowledge, they still cannot contain the spread in China. So what that suggests to me is that there is probably a longer period of asymptomatic infection. When I go through now the sequence, you'll understand why that is so important. So there are a few cells that you have to understand about. One is Langerhans cells in the skin. These are immune cells. Fibroblasts, which make collagen in the skin as well. Monocytes, which are a particular type of immune cell. And keratinocytes. These are the ones that make your skin. They continue to replicate, and this is what eventually becomes the layer of your skin. All of these can become infected by the virus. And so this is why it's relevant with regards to the mosquito bite, because that's what the mosquito does. It bites in the skin, and then what you have happen is that virus can then infect these cells, monocytes, Langerhans cells, fibroblasts, and so on, cause some local inflammation. But once it's infected these cells, it will then replicate. So this will become 1,000, and then and all of these cells, it spreads around, and then it goes from here, not in the bloodstream, but via the lymphatic system to the lymphatics. And so that's where people start to get symptoms, is that they start to then feel unwell, the high temperature, the joint pains, because once it gets to the lymphatics, it then spreads in the bloodstream, and it tends to focus on the joints. And this is what it kind of looks like. This is not exact, but it's the closest picture I could get. The lining of the joints, the synovium, not so much the cartilage, but the lining of the joints. The main point is that the virus gets in there, binds to particular cells in the joints, replicates, and continues to cause inflammation. This is when people end up with the characteristic joint pains. It can affect multiple different joints, causing these kinds of symptoms. So this is the cycle that it goes through. So follow it now, and you'll understand why this is important in the context of if it had extra capabilities. The virus is put in by the mosquito doing the bite. It then replicates. It then spreads to the lymph nodes. This is when you start to feel unwell. From the lymph nodes, it spreads in the bloodstream to various parts in the body. It's not just the joints, it also can get in the brain and the neurology, but it's in the bloodstream. And because the virus is in the bloodstream, another mosquito comes along, bites the person, and pulls up more virus into them. And that mosquito then continues to do the cycle. And then it bites someone else. And this is a cycle that keeps on going. The point I'm making is that if this phase, from when the virus is replicating, spreading to the lymph node, and having a viremia, is largely asymptomatic because there is no interferon response, you will then have a period of time when people are walking around as normal, they have a serum viremia, they are being bitten by mosquitoes, so lots of mosquitoes are getting the virus, they are then spreading it to more people, and you have this situation continuing on. This is my prediction as to potentially why this could be happening. It's either that, or the other piece of the puzzle is that the immune system in the population has been damaged. And so, therefore, they are not responding in a typical way. And this is what is causing the higher circulation of virus, because people are just not getting a strong enough interferon response. And this is the other part of the combination of this virus with COVID. The two things together can cause another kind of storm. And this is what I'm predicting: amplified inflammation, because the post COVID macrophages are already hyperactivated. If they become infected with chikungunya, you then have even worse inflammation. And it won't just be the joints this time, it will be anywhere that you have macrophages being concentrated: blood vessels, endothelium, brain. Additionally, you may have slower viral clearance because the immune dysregulation. The immune system is weaker. And so you have an increased circulation of virus, which then increases the risk of more mosquitoes getting infected to pass it on. Again, brain risk, because both of the viruses can affect the brain, the central nervous system. Brain stem choroid plexus inflammation will be worsened, and especially high-risk groups, immunocompromised, those with long COVID potentially, may have worse symptoms. At the end of the day, we are in one of the strangest environments I have ever seen, where I am now starting to worry that people who should be looking out for the health of the population are almost looking for ways for people to get sick. It's very unnerving, it's disconcerting. We should be trying to find answers, not coming up with more pandemics. Normally, a pandemic, if you think about it, the 1918 pandemic with the flu pandemic, then you have the 2019 COVID pandemic. So it should be 2118 something pandemic. We shouldn't be worrying about a pandemic within another 2, 3, 5 years. This is not right. Somebody, it seems, is not too worried about populations getting sick. And so more than ever, everyone needs to be educated, understand their own health, and critically be responsible for your health. Because at the end of the day, what we have learned from COVID is that there doesn't seem to be enough accountability or responsibility when things don't go right. You are, sadly, your advocate. So please keep listening to keep ahead of the science. Final reminder, coming up just tomorrow is the NeuroCovid. This may be more relevant than you think if we continue to have the circulation of these kinds of viruses. And remember, in tropical countries, the circulation is by mosquitoes. Imagine if it's possible that bedbugs could do this as well. Then we have a real issue on our hands. That's the worry, and we've got to find ways to address it. Have a good evening.